Good evening, everybody, and welcome into another episode of New England Sports Weekly. As always, I am your host, Sean Metcalf, and I am glad that you've decided to join me this evening. Sorry about the late start here. For whatever reason, having some trouble with the streaming service. We'll try to hammer it out because that's been a couple weeks here in a row. But we'll breeze past this. We'll just jump over this hurdle and keep on going for this evening. All right, so it is another busy show. I know we say that a lot, but really there is a lot going on right now in New England sports. From the Celtics, Bruins, Patriots, Red Sox, everything's cooking right now. And of course, hopefully you guys, wherever you're living, if you live here in Maine with me, live down in York or Cumberland County, hopefully you have power. If not, whenever you're catching up and listen to this, hopefully everything's going all right for you. We're almost getting to the end of winter. We almost, what was it, with a week or so or less than a week we have until the end of winter here, and then finally we get to spring and hallelujah, it's baseball season, all that stuff, and getting towards basketball, playoff hockey, all the good stuff in the NFL draft. So we're creeping closer to it, creeping closer to that finish line, getting ready for the good stuff. But until then, we got a lot to talk about here for you this evening. And without further ado, we will jump right into the Out of the Box segment, still sponsored by yours truly. And we will kick things off with some news out of Patriots camp. And that is Janu Smith was traded away. And they got rid of that Janu Smith contract. So he was, if you remember, he was one of the big signings, not last year, but the year before. Janu Smith he and Hunter Henry were supposed to form that dynamic duo at tight end, but nothing ever came to that for the Patriots. And now Janu Smith has been traded to the Atlanta Falcons to team up with Kyle Pitts. So we'll see how this all fares here for the Patriots. And in the package for Janu Smith, the Patriots ended up getting a 7th round pick, just a 7th rounder. That's how far Janu Smith has fallen. Remember when he was considered a top-tier tight end free agent? There was a lot of buzz after he caught 8 touchdown passes with the Titans in a not so pass-heavy offense a couple of years ago. And everybody was so excited. Yours truly, I wasn't thinking he was going to be the next incarnation of Gronk or Travis Kelce or Darren Waller or something like that. But I was still pleased with what he was going to bring to the table, and nothing ever materialized. And instead we got low light after low light, none better than the tipped ball to himself, and then the interception, the three interception game that he was heavily handed in that week 3 game against New Orleans in 2021. So things started off rocky and never got better. So he was traded away to the Atlanta Falcons for a 7th round pick. And then the Patriots have cut Jake Bailey, their punter. The punter that they spent, what was it, $6 million on. They spent a pretty hefty amount of money on Jake Bailey. And this is a guy that Belichick just a couple of years ago spoke very highly of. This year had a rough season, was injured, then was on the suspended list. So things didn't go well for Jake Bailey. And he has been officially cut from the Patriots. And bad things always, or negative news, always seems to come in threes. And to round it out, the Patriots let Jacoby Meyers walk, and he signed a 3-year, $30 million deal with the Las Vegas Raiders for $11 million per year. And I believe $21 million of that was guaranteed. So Jacoby Meyers out the door. Patriots are left with a pretty lackluster wide receiver core, and not that if, and we'll talk about it here in just a moment when we get to this whole section, but the Patriots really didn't have the most exciting wide receiver core, even with Jakobi Meyers there, but you had old, reliable, old, dependable still there. And now he is out the door in Las Vegas, teaming up with Josh McDaniels, his former offensive coordinator. And obviously he gets to play second fiddle, third fiddle, wherever you want to put he and Hunter Renfrow, with the big alpha dog out there that is Devontae Adams. So it'll be interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to see how they decide to fill some of these other holes. Although we did see how they were going to replace Jakobi Meyers, because they took that same deal that the Raiders gave Jakobi Meyers and turned right around and gave that to JuJu Smith-Schuster for a 3-year, $33 million deal. So JuJu, who has had a solid NFL career, he's just below 5,000 yards receiving for his career. He broke onto the scene and had a pretty good first year, had 900 yards and had 3 touchdown catches. But then his second year had 1,200 yards, had the 8 touchdown catches. But remember, he was playing second fiddle to Antonio Brown in 2018. And Antonio Brown at that time was amazing. This was back in the heyday of Antonio Brown for JuJu, and he got to eat in that offense. So in that, 2018, actually I was off, 1,426 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he had 200 more yards than I thought he had. But point being is that was his best year. Last year had 977 yards and had the 3 touchdowns with the Kansas City Chiefs. Didn't exactly light the world on fire like we thought, or some people thought he might do going to Kansas City, because this is a guy that's had a solid NFL career, and the last couple of years has had to deal with injuries, plus it had to deal with the skeleton of Ben Roethlisberger, or really not a skeleton, the bloated corpse of Ben Roethlisberger, just the way that he was out there playing. So never really since probably 2018 has had a legitimate quarterback, because Roethlisberger, since 2018 was probably Roethlisberger's last really good year, and then everything's kind of slid downhill from there. But the point being is that it just, I will talk about how I really feel about these moves here in just a moment. But this is this move, it doesn't really get the needle moving for really any Patriots fan I know out there that I've seen anyways. So this is the start to the move. We'll see if they continue to make other moves. So JuJu Smith-Schuster is in and Jakobi Meyers is out. And the Patriots have made a few other minor moves, signing some offensive line help with bringing in Anderson from the Denver Broncos. The Patriots are trying to shore up some depth there as well. And really, so far they haven't made, depending on where you want to put JuJu, I certainly don't put him in this category, but they haven't made that splash that I'm super excited for. Not at wide receiver, that there was going to be a free agency ad that was going to make you excited, but more from the trade market. But we'll see how that goes. And over to the Boston Garden with their 2 occupants. The Boston Celtics have had a rough go of it here as of late. They lost their last game. If I don't die on you here, my God. But the Boston Celtics lost their last game to the Houston Rockets, who are in tank mode. They're right there in the top 5 worst teams in the NBA. So they're in the conversation for the draft lottery, trying to get the best chance to get as many lottery balls as they can. But So this is obviously a team that only has 15 wins and just is absolutely horrid. But yet somehow the Celtics found a way to drop that game as they lost 111 to 109 and just have been in a little bit of a tailspin here as they have they're 2-4 over their last 6 games. 2-4. So this Celtics team is just they've found just horrible ways to lose games here. Going back to the Nets, Knicks, Cavs on the road. They did pick up the 2 back-to-back wins against the Blazers and the Hawks, but the road trip just got off to the road trip in Houston got off to a rocky start. Now they are in Minnesota tonight playing the Timberwolves, and tune in to check out that game. Can't give you the play-by-play, but they are trying to kind of get things back on track here. They just haven't looked the same as they were earlier in the season where they were just rolling over teams. And now the Boston Celtics, after dropping 4 of their last 6 games, have fallen 3 games behind the Milwaukee Bucks for first place. And don't look now, but the Philadelphia 76ers are in the rearview mirror, and it's a hell of a lot closer than you would have expected. They are only 1 game behind the Boston Celtics for second place. So the Celtics are in danger of not only forget about the number 1 overall seed, but they're in danger of losing home court advantage past the first round. The Boston Celtics just need to find their groove and find it fast, as we're 17 games away from the conclusion of the regular season before we get to the postseason. So running out of time to make up ground here. They only have 1 more game against Milwaukee left. So that'll be interesting to see. And they won't have a home game until March 24th. They still have tonight's game. Then they have to go to Portland, then to Utah, and then to Sacramento before coming home to play the Pacers on March 24th. And then that Sunday playing the San Antonio Spurs. And of course, their counterparts across the way, the Boston Bruins, have had a tough go of it here themselves. Now, albeit the Bruins themselves are on record to smash a lot of NHL records, as they are the fastest team ever to 50 wins. They're 50, 11, and 5, but they did take a pretty tough loss last night to the Chicago Blackhawks, losing 6-3, although one of those was an empty netter. And then they lost their Sunday game against the Detroit Red Wings. Excuse me, not the Sunday game. They lost the Monday game because it was a back-to-back. It was Sunday. So they took the victory at home against the Red Wings. Then they lost the back-to-back against going to Detroit. So the Bruins have had a little bit of a rough patch here. They are 1-3 in their last 4 games. Now, of course, there have been some stretches here where they had to play 3 games in 4 nights. And again, that's what they're going to have to do here with playing the Winnipeg Jets on Thursday, have Friday off, then go to Minnesota, then on Saturday, and then Buffalo on Sunday. So it doesn't get any easier for the Boston Bruins as far as that condensed schedule. But again, all NHL teams are going through this as well, with about 19 to 18 games left of their season on the Bruins end as well. So it's been a rocky start to this last couple of weeks, or not start, but it's been a rocky last week or week and a half here for both the Bruins and the Celtics, as they are trying to get back on track and look like the dominant forces that they were earlier in the year for both of these teams. All right, so as we mentioned off the top of the show, the big news of today really has been the Patriots move, specifically with bringing in JuJu Smith-Schuster. Now, of course, we weren't on air when Janu Smith was traded. So when that move came down the pipe, we'll touch on that here for a second. When the Janu Smith trade came in, I was obviously not happy that they wasted that money, but they were just cutting their ties finally with Janu. Sorry, we got Janu and JuJu in the same conversation. So, man, it's gonna be fun. But with Janu Smith, and they both have Smith in their last name. One of them just it's full last name, the other it's half of it. But with Janu, as you talked about, he was supposed to come in here, be that athletic after the catch freak that they thought he was going to be. Because this isn't me making something up. This was a quote from Belichick saying that Janu Smith was the one of the best run after catch athletes, if not the best in the league. Let that sink in. Did we see any run after the catch that made you go, wow, with Janu? Did he even, how many catches can you remember from Janu? Let alone run after the catch? He had one touchdown. So what? He got paid $30 million for one touchdown, basically. Now, listen, I never put the gigantic expectations that some people had with Janu Smith, who thought he was going to be this freak of an athlete that was just going to run over and bowl over people, and we were going to see this 800 to 1,000 yard tight end put up 10 touchdowns and have, or even more than that, going to be a monster out there alongside Hunter Henry. All he was a turnover machine. That New Orleans one just is seared in my brain with those 3 interceptions that he was pretty much the full cause of, especially that one where he did basically that bounce pass that got intercepted. My God. He was one of the biggest wastes of money I've seen the Patriots ever kind of just throw out there. Albert Hainsworth might have been the other one, but really they were kind of he wasn't getting paid as much by the Patriots as he was still by Washington. Yeah, this might have been one of the worst Bill has had over his tenure. Not that he was a bad guy or anything, just never worked out. So Janu's gone, so now it's down to Hunter Henry, who's been a solid tight end. So really out of that crop of free agents, you hit not just a home run, you hit a grand slam with Matthew Judon, who's been in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year until injuries in his first year. And then he still had a solid second half of the year last year, but got beat out. And then you brought in Hunter Henry, who's been a very solid, I'd put him in that B- category, B, just solid B, as he's been a good producer in there. Well, at least his first year had the 10 touchdowns, had 600 yards, was a solid target for Mac Jones. Just obviously this year, he was a victim of circumstances with Matt Patricia having to be the offensive coordinator, with Belichick assigning him to that position. So two hits that you had there with Matthew Judon and Hunter Henry. Now, Kendrick Bourne looked like he was going to take a massive year 2 step, at least with the Patriots, because this was his 6th or 7th year in the league. But he had the 800 yards his first year in New England. You're like, and he showed some speed, and you're like, this guy could actually, you might have found a diamond in the rough. But he took a major step back, and mostly due to whatever asinine reason he was stuck in Patricia and Belichick's doghouse. But now he steps front and center as far as he's right now he's your number 2 because of JuJu signing. But then after that, the free agency class with Nelson Aguilar, who's gone this year, was a bust of a contract, didn't do much. You've gotten some decent contributions out of Jalen Mills, but still, we're not talking about a number 1 corner here. So it was a mixed bag here for the Patriots with that. free agency signing now, obviously Janu is the one that kind of was the turd in the punch bowl, if you will, for that free agency class. Now they had to sign it to get back to respectability as far as with that roster, and they did find a guy in Matthew Judon that they can build with. But again, Janu Smith being let go, it was more of a relief just because it was just taking up money on the cap. So now he's out the door. As you mentioned, Jake Bailey's out the door. Now, the one that hurts is to have Jacoby Meyers walk. Now, I don't mean that this hurts from, oh God, you lost to Randy Moss, you lost Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, or Gronk, or pick your favorite receiver, you lost Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or Deebo Samuel, you lost a guy of that caliber off your roster. No, he's Jacoby Meyers is never going to be a number one. He's never going to be that dominant force. He's a solid possession receiver that knew this system, and when Mac needed somebody to throw to, he could count on Jacoby at least being open. But again, still the loss from the where it hurts is that you're losing the dependability and a security blanket for Mac. And before you go, well, you can't have a $30 million, you can't have an $11 million a year wide receiver, but yet you want to go bring in a $20 to $25 million wide receiver. You can have that. Plenty of teams across the league have it. The team he's going to has it in Las Vegas. Devontae Adams is $25 million a year. $25 million a year plus Jacoby's 11. You can do it if you want to. Do the Patriots want to do it? Apparently not. They want to just kind of piece together their wide receiving core for whatever reason, which just boggles my mind. Now, from the standpoint, like going back to it again, I know some people out there want to make it sound like they want to play both sides. They want to play one extreme or the other with Jacoby as far as, oh, okay, no, he sucks. He wasn't worth it. He was just your run of the mill wide receiver, blah, 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 blah. Or you got the super diehards out there. Oh, Jacoby, blah, blah, blah. He could be a number one. For me, again, he's not. And obviously, I know with sports talk, this is kind of like the road you don't want to travel as far as riding the fence. But again, Jacoby Meyers is not a game breaker. He's not a guy that if it was $15 million a year, I would have been, I'm sorry, Jacoby, walk out the door. I can't see paying for a mid-level possession wide receiver and paying that much money. But at $11 million a year, that's pretty solid. I can live with $11 million a year for Jacoby Meyers. And then to go turn around and give that money to JuJu Smith-Schuster, who I don't want this to feel like, oh, I hate JuJu. I don't. I think he's a solid wide receiver. Again, he kind of falls in the same mold as Jacoby Meyers from the standpoint of being a solid number two if you have that number one or you have multiple top tier options ahead of them, whether it be wide receiver at tight end or whatever pass catching position you put him at. This signing to me is just, yes, you get a more athletic receiver in JuJu, but to me, JuJu was more of a product when he had that 1,400-yard season, was a product of Antonio Brown just absolutely tearing it up in Pittsburgh. And you had a young wide receiver who has good skill set. Don't get me wrong, JuJu again, if JuJu was your second guy or your main slot guy that you had, he'd be a really good slot guy just as that. But to have him be your number one, this is where it makes you scratch your head and ask you what they have up their sleeve, or is this it, or is this all that they're going to do? Because there's still nobody on this offense that I have to stop and think about and be like, man, as a defensive coordinator, I am going to get absolutely burned today. I mean, as far as any of the pass catchers, as far as your wide receivers and tight ends, we know Ramondre Stevenson has turned into a pretty good, is bordering on being a star now, but JuJu Smith-Schuster just doesn't do it for me. I don't hate him, but I don't like him. He's just another wide receiver. And I would rather pay that money to Jakobi Meyers, who knows the system, has a rapport with Mac Jones. And I'd rather go out, if you want to get speed, you want to get better, go out, trade for a Terry McLaurin. I know DeAndre Hopkins isn't a burner, but he's a guy that uses his physicality. Go get a DeAndre Hopkins, a Terry McLaurin, or name your wide receiver that might be available out there via trade, or a Mike Evans or a Chris Godwin, because those are guys that we haven't heard a lot about. But with Tampa Bay, with Brady not coming back there, are they going to try to blow it up, try to recoup and get draft picks and redo their franchise? So could you go get a Chris Godwin or a Mike Evans? Could you do something like that? Get somebody in that mold. And then if you brought in a Godwin or an Evans or a Hopkins or a McLaurin, they can be the bona fide number one. And then I would love to have Jakobi Meyers in that situation. Now, again, I don't think JuJu's bad, but I think he's overrated because people look at him they put a number one tag on the guy, but he's never, to me, stepped up to be a number one wide receiver. The one time he put up number one wide receiver numbers was when Antonio Brown was in his prime before he went off the deep end. But we haven't, if he was that good, wouldn't you think that the best quarterback in the league and Patrick Mahomes would be knocking on his door, texting him and calling him up all the time and be like, come on back to Kansas City, try to get him to come on back, try to repeat? No, I mean, and again, I'm not saying that's the end all be all and that was everything why he didn't go back, but again, it's just, it's a little bit of a letdown here because the Patriots have the Patriots just don't have those number one weapons. They just don't. And they need to try to find those guys, whether it's, which in my opinion, the best way to do it's going to be via trade, because just look at all these teams out there, like the Buffalo Bills, the Tennessee Titans, the Miami Dolphins, although they already had Jalen Waddle, but they went out and got Tyreek Hill, so they have that dynamic duo. But teams like that, they've gotten these bona fide number one stud receivers to come in and help them just take their offense to a whole nother level. And the Patriots just want to shop in that bargain bin. And this year, the wide receiver market was so just bland and blah. There was nothing out there. There's nothing flashy. There was no true number one. Jakobi Meyers was the best thing on that market, in my opinion. And that's saying something when he's the best free agent option out there. And he didn't have a lot of teams knocking down the door either. So that's just kind of the part, like, why don't you want to bring in what you already know, what you have, and somebody that's dependable with, okay, I get it. You're chasing that athletic upside, which, hey, I'm up for. Hell, maybe you could have brought in Jakobi Meyers, and now that you have Nelson Aguilar off the books, maybe if you wait it out a little bit with JuJu, you might be able to get him a little bit cheaper and bring him in, and you have both of those guys on the roster if you want a JuJu here. but I just don't know. I don't know. I mean, JuJu, to me, I've never been in what the last couple of years when he's been in free agents, be like, all right, they need to go out and get JuJu Smith-Schuster. No, I've never been like, okay, this needs to happen. He's a solid guy, a good guy, but not nobody I'm just losing it over either way. It's just I would have rather had Meyers at this point. Cut and dry. And one thing I did forget to mention there in the out of the box segment and kind of or earlier was that the Patriots have brought back Jonathan Jones as well, who was one of the top tier corners out on the market. So he came back on a 2-year deal, basically stating that this is a place that he knows and that he loves and that he's been and he wants to stay here. So good, at least good news on that end that you do have Jonathan Jones coming back and he'll be on this roster and he'll be ready to rock and roll come next year as well. So, but looking back, but like I said, looking forward, I think this is where I, I don't think that you can be done. Now, my gut tells me that they might be done until we get to the draft and maybe they spend a day 2 pick us maybe one of their second rounds or third round picks on a wide receiver to kind of get another guy in here. As much as I would love them to get a Jordan Addison or go after one of these guys in the draft as a Flower, somebody like that, as much as I would love that, it just I don't think that's going to happen in this case. I just feel like they went out, got JuJu Smith-Schuster, and unless something kind of falls in the lap. Now I know that the one good thing there is that I have seen reports today that the Red Sox, sorry, just saw an alert, but the Patriots are still looking at other options at wide receiver, looking at the trade market with obviously DeAndre Hopkins, looking at Mike Evans, looking at a Jerry Jeudy or slash a Cortland Sutton. So they're still looking at that market. So they haven't shut that down. So I do like that they are willing to at least keep on looking, and maybe we see that, and maybe they and one thing here, maybe the Bucks aren't ready to exactly move on because they did sign Baker Mayfield today. So possibly maybe they might not trade some of their wide receivers, although they still might, maybe to get some draft capital and recoup because they're so far over the cap that they might have to be forced into making some moves here. But I think in that market, I think you're gonna have to go down that road to get you because you need a number one. We've seen it time and time again these last 5 years plus. If you're going to win the Super Bowl, even when Brady went to Tampa, he went there for a reason because he knew he's getting older, but he had Godwin and he had Mike Evans, a stacked wide receiver room. And Patrick Mahomes right now is the only exception. Obviously, Brady in his heyday, in his golden days, in his prime, was the all-time exception to the rule as far as not needing the number one to win a Super Bowl, because we saw it when it happened in the early 2000s, those first 3 Super Bowls. Didn't have a guy that was going to make the Hall of Fame. Now, obviously, things changed later on with Randy Moss and Wes Welker in 07, and then you had the greatest tight end of all time and Rob Gronkowski come in. So you had those stud number ones, but the game has evolved to the point now where you need those, even if you have a all pro caliber quarterback, unless your name is Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow needs them. Josh Allen needs them. Jalen Hurts. We can go on and on down the list outside of Patrick Mahomes, and you all need them. So you need to go out and get those number one weapons. And so far, the Patriots, they haven't shown the willingness to do that. Yes, a couple of years ago they got Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne, but none of those guys I'm like, oh, that's a true bona fide number one. So I'm hoping that they still are, that the reports are true, that they're still exploring a DeAndre Hopkins trade, that they're still open to that, and still open to other ideas of going in. Like I said, maybe getting a Jerry Jeudy out from the Broncos, because Jerry Jeudy was dealing with injuries, but he's a guy that was taken in the first round. He showed explosiveness. He still showed it a little bit out there in Denver, but he's kind of stuck out there in purgatory because we all thought, oh, Russell Wilson's going there and this could turn it around. No, he's been trash out there. So it's been a mixed bag here as far as with the Patriots trying to go after wide receivers. And I'm not blown away by the JuJu Smith-Schuster signing today. All right, so we'll switch things over here to, as we mentioned, the winter sports teams, because right now we'll kind of combine the two of these because they're both the Bruins and the Celtics have both been struggling mightily struggling this recently. As we mentioned, the Bruins have lost 3 of their last 4. The Celtics have lost 4 of their last 6. They're both looking a little just a little lackadaisical out there. Now, with the Boston Bruins, I'm not as concerned as I am with the Boston Celtics. With the Boston Bruins, yes, they're going through this tough stretch, but they had to play 3 games in 4 nights, had the back-to-back in the Garden and then in Detroit with the Red Wings. And then last night went to Chicago and in a game that, because Chicago, we know that they're going for the future. They're selling off their pieces. They traded one of their all-time franchise greats and Patrick Kane away. And Jonathan Toews is still there, but they're really trying to build for the future. And so this is their team that the Bruins, nothing's guaranteed, but this is a game that they should have had. And yet there was just moments where it looked like they were trying to, they were flipping the switch on and off there, because yet they've already gotten the fastest ever to the 50 win mark. This team is rolling on the season. They're already locked up a playoff spot. They're so cool. They're almost guaranteed to get that number 1 seed. So everything's going right for them, but it just seems like, especially that Blackhawks game, they were just playing with the switch there as far as, all right, yeah, we'll turn it on, turn it off in this portion of the game. And they just didn't have it last night. They just were lackadaisical, but more from the standpoint that, okay, we've gotten everything locked up. We've already proven to ourselves that this is how we're already on record pace. And I think they have that mentality of, all right, let's try to be ready for the playoffs. Let's try to get into that position. Whereas with the Boston Celtics, they're in a dogfight for that number 1 seed. As where the Bruins, they've already just demolished through their schedule, just rolled right through it. But with the Boston Celtics, yes, this is a team that made it to the NBA Finals last year. And this is a team that still does have a deep bench. They still have one of the better rosters in the Eastern Conference, and obviously led by Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But we talked about the Knicks and the Nets game last week, just how frustrating those losses were. But it just seems like they keep finding ways to lose these games. And it seems like they just choose to, again, they choose to flip the switch, but more from the standpoint of like, all right, we'll just try to coast into that playoff spot. We know we're good. We know we're ready to go, but you're in a position where you can't afford that right now. Yes, you'll make the playoffs, but the way that you're playing right now, you don't have that rhythm. You don't have that timing with your bench switches, with everything. Just everything is so out of rhythm with this team. And Jason Tatum has had some of his worst shooting that I've seen him have in a long time. It just seems like you watch some of these games and he's clanking up threes. And I'm not saying don't take threes, but there are nights where it just is awful watching them shoot, and they just are struggling at this moment. So the Celtics, I am so much more worried about. And we talked about with Joe Mazzulla. Now we lost Damon Stoudemire, who is going to take a head coaching job at Georgia Tech. So you lost one of your best assistants and a guy that I thought was going to be the head coach of this team after the Udoka situation. But now the Celtics just they're playing like they already have everything locked up. At least that's the way it kind of feels. They're not playing with that same energy. Everything seems so disjointed with this team. And then when it seems like, okay, yeah, they should just play with a little bit more energy, play with a little bit more this or that. And to me, they choose at times to flip the switch on when we're going to play with speed, when we're going to just kind of dribble and slow down. They're at their best when they're out in front, when they're athletic, when they're not when they're generating with those multiple passes instead of just being iso ball and just trying to do it one-on-one and slowing this game down and making some slower passes. And just again, the Houston game was just so frustrating, just because this is a team that you could tell early in the game the Celtics were like, all right, we can get this, we got this, and then they just took their foot off the gas and they got beat by a bad Houston Rockets team. Jason Tatum missed a layup late in the game with 4 seconds left to try to get that tying basket, but he seems out of sorts as well. And Jaylen Brown was calling him out in the post-game press conference. So things just aren't going well at all for the Boston Celtics as far as over this stretch. Now, they still technically have time to turn this around, but they have what we talked about, 16, somewhere between 14 to 16 games left in the season. So they still have some time, but it's still these are issues that have been going on here for even a little bit longer, because after the All-Star break, they've been 5-5. So they just have been a 500 mediocre team since the All-Star break. Whereas last year they came out of January, February, just clicking on all cylinders. And I don't even want to blame not having Robert Williams out there, because they've had leads. They've had 28-point leads. They've had 14. They've had 11-point leads where they've had chances to close these games out. And they just, for whatever reason, mentally, they just checked out. Like they're like, all right, we just need to get to April so that we can get to the playoffs. And then we're going to start. You can't just dick around like this anymore. You got to be ready to go. You got to fight and scrap for it, because Milwaukee is out there fighting and scrapping for it. And Philadelphia, where I still don't trust Philadelphia as a true title contender, but you can't just take them nonchalant because, we've beaten them and we always find a way. One of these times they're gonna find the way to beat you in a playoff series. But again, they still have the talent, they still have the pieces to get out of it. It's just to right the ship and get back on track here. But I just want to see them these last couple weeks of March here and into April, just get on a little bit of roll, show more consistency, and get consistency out of the superstars, because that's the part lately. Because Jaylen Brown in that Rockets game had 43 points, but Jason Tatum only had 22, which Jason Tatum's coming off the bench. If he's a bench player, really good. But you're the star. You're the superstar of the Celtics. You're a top 5 player in the league. And you're putting up a few clankers here late in the season. And it's just frustrating to watch. Just absolutely frustrating. And as we mentioned, I'm just going to chalk this up on the Bruins end of it. I'm not super worried about this team right now. It's just a mild, all right, don't let this become a trend thing, but I can see how it is, because you've got some 3 games in 4 nights type of situation. And you have some older guys that maybe you're trying to get rested up for the playoffs. And you're already you've put your foot down on their throat as far as in the Atlantic Division and really in the Eastern Conference already. So they can afford to do this a little bit more. And again, they've just played more games kind of in that stretch than the Celtics have kind of been asked to. And I don't have those same chemistry or those same issues that I do with the Boston Celtics. So so from that standpoint, I'm not entirely I'm not entirely I'm not out on the Celtics, but I'm just I'm just starting to get starting to. I am worried about what's going on with this Celtics team. There's time there. There's time to correct it, but you don't have unlimited time here, and we're getting closer to the start of the playoffs, and I just want to see them keep that light on and just keep the intensity up and keep it up down the stretch. And that'll bring us to our one big bet segment. And in this week's edition of the one big bet, we are going to go out to the NHL. And in the NHL, we have the Boston Bruins versus the Winnipeg Jets. And tomorrow is a pretty good matchup here, as we have both teams in the playoffs. Obviously, Winnipeg is far more superior. The Bruins are far more superior. They're the best team in the NHL, but Winnipeg is still fighting for a playoff spot. They're right in the hunt. But I'm going to take the Boston Bruins on the money line to turn things around. And as far as the total of goals in this one, give me 5.5. So that's 6 goals in this game. I think the Bruins come out. They come out pretty strong here, and give me a Pastrnak anytime goal. Pasta's been a little bit quiet, so I think we're going to have a pretty big Pasta game in this standpoint. So that's the Bruins on the money line, the puck line of 5.5, and a Pastrnak goal. So if you put down a sweet, let's see, $40 on this game, that will give you $100 in winnings for this game. So if you feel good about the Bruins in this game, just plop a little bit of that cash and you'll walk away with $100. All right. So that is going to do it for this show. Stay tuned for next week, as the Boston Bruins and Boston Celtics are continuing their push towards the playoffs and trying to right the ship on their end. Obviously, with NFL free agency officially underway today at 4 p.m., we'll see if there's more signings from the Patriots, or maybe they make a trade as we are getting closer to draft season and trying to improve this team. And of course, the Red Sox are gearing up for the regular season. We are only, 2 weeks away from opening day. Pop this calendar up here. Yeah, so 2 weeks from tomorrow is opening day. So actually, on that March 29th show, we'll have our MLB season preview in that show as well. But with a lot to talk about here, a lot to kind of keep up with in this show. So in the meantime, you can always catch us at 8 o'clock streaming the show right here on YouTube. We'll try to get things running and up and going earlier next week. Try to see if we can get a hard line in here, work a few things out. And of course, you can always, if you can't catch the show live, you can catch that on the podcast version on Spotify or SoundCloud. Just search New England Sports Weekly, or you can go to, or if you want to send us any questions, you can hit me up at Sean_Met28 on Instagram and Twitter, or hit the show accounts up on NE Sports Weekly on Twitter, or NE Sports WK on Instagram. Send me any of your questions. All right, everybody. Well, you have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next one.